City Council to order. I invite you to join me for the Pledge of Allegiance if you'd like to. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. All right, if we could please have the city clerk do a roll call.
Humby. Absent. Gabriel.
Here.
Harrington.
Here.
O'Doherty.
Here.
Schmickel.
Here.
Schuster.
Here.
Somerville.
Here.
Pierce.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
That's 8 present and 1 absent, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to public comment on non-agenda items. Public comment on non-agenda items. Seeing none, we'll close the public comment period. Move into consideration of changes to the agenda. Vice Mayor Pierce.
Thank you, Mayor. We have one change this evening, and I move that the following change to the agenda be approved. It's a consideration of renewal of the contract between the City of Laramie of Wyoming and Donna Clayton for judicial services to the consent agenda. It's going to be a new item, item number 9L.
Second.
All right, all those in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye. Aye.
Very good. Vice Mayor?
Thank you. I move that the agenda be set as changed.
Second.
Once again, same sign. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? When all of us vote aye, I sometimes feel like it's a waste of time to ask if there's any opposition, so maybe I don't need to do that. All right. That's going to take us now into the first item under our items that fall under agenda item 6, proclamations, public hearings, notifications. And we do have some this evening, and I am very happy to do a proclamation. City Clerk, I have a quick question for you. We have our interpreter here with us, so I think I'll probably go to that proclamation first as opposed to the Hunger Action Month proclamation. Do you think there's an issue with that?
Mayor, that's up to the council. I've let both proclamation participants in, so
we'll just do them in order then. We'll just do them in order. I think it's fine. I'm happy to do that, and it's really not a problem. Just a momentary little bit of confusion on my part. But we're really pleased to have our guests with us. I'm first going to read the proclamation for Hunger Action Month 2022. Whereas addressing the food insecurity needs of children, youth, men, women, seniors, active military, and veterans today is fundamental for the future of Laramie. And whereas hunger and poverty are issues of vital concern in Albany County, where 12.8% of people struggle with hunger, and 1 in every 6 children do not know where their next meal will come from. And whereas the need for comprehensive, coordinated emergency food programs place upon our community a critical responsibility. And whereas the City of Laramie is committed to combating hunger in every part of our community and providing additional resources that those in Albany County need. And whereas it is our responsibility as citizens of Laramie to learn about hunger and to do our part in reducing that hunger. And whereas the City of Laramie partners with Food Bank of Wyoming, a member of the Feeding America nationwide network of food banks and their local partners, Laramie Interfaith Good Samaritan, and the Laramie Soup Kitchen, to educate people about the important role of hunger relief organizations, raising awareness for the need to devote more resources and attention to hunger and food insecurity issues, And whereas more than 4,920 residents of Albany County rely annually on food provided by the Food Bank of Wyoming and their local partners. And whereas the Food Bank of Wyoming, its generous funders, volunteers, and local partner agencies are committed to educating citizens on the role of food banks and hunger relief efforts in solving hunger. And whereas Food Bank of Wyoming provides over 9 million meals across Wyoming annually, and to engage each of us to help end hunger one meal at a time, either through donations, social media shares, or volunteer shifts. And whereas the month of September is designated Hunger Action Month in order to bring attention to food insecurity in our communities, now therefore be it resolved that I, Paul Weaver, acting as mayor and president of the governing body of the city of Laramie, do hereby proclaim September 2022 as Hunger Action Month and encourage all citizens to increase their understanding and awareness of food insecurity and how it impacts our nation, state, county, and communities. And I see we have Sarah Glant. I hope I got your last name correct. Welcome, Ms. Glant. We're really glad to have you here. Would you like to say a few words about Hunger Action Month 2022?
Yes, thank you. So first of all, just to introduce myself, I'm the AmeriCorps Food Security Ambassador for the Food Bank of Wyoming. And your recognition of Hunger Action Month is so important just to bring awareness to food insecurity as a whole, especially in our community. And I, again, just want to thank the Laramie Soup Kitchen and Laramie Interfaith and the UW Food Share Pantry at the university for fighting against hunger in our community. It's unfortunately an ongoing issue. It's always going to be, and it's gotten a bit more difficult after COVID-19 and the rising cost of food. But the Food Bank of Wyoming and our partner agencies are so resilient and they continue to fight against hunger. So again, thank you so much for proclaiming September as Hunger Action Month.
Thank you, Ms. Glant. I think it's remarkable in an unfortunate way that we have a 12.8%, and I'm going to suggest that that's an approximation because we may not be able to get all of the information about that we need. 12.8% of our population here in Albany County is food insecure, including 1 in every 6 children. And this is despite the resources that we have worked to have in place and that other agencies have worked to have in place. That's a significant number. And I think throughout September as Hunger Action Month and every other day and month of this year, that deserves some consideration. It's not good news. And I think you're right, Ms. Glant, when you talk about how this is not a problem that seems to be improving, and it's going to take some more work and some more innovation and some more willingness to be creative and innovative about the way we address it. And I'm sorry for speaking on this issue, but I'm struck by those numbers. Frankly, I'm struck by those numbers. I think they're uncomfortably high. When we talk about economic development and all the other things that we prioritize in our community, if we're not taking care of things like this, if we're not understanding these base level problems faced by unacceptably high numbers of people in our community, I think we're missing the big picture. So thanks again for your attendance here. Council members, would anybody else like to speak about this proclamation before we move on to the next one? Thank you. And thank you again, Ms. Glant, for the work that you're doing on behalf of this issue. We now have a proclamation that it's my honor to present in recognition of Deaf Awareness Week. Whereas Deaf Awareness Week was first celebrated by the World Federation of the Deaf, WFD, in 1958, this event is also known as International Week of the Deaf, commemorating the first Congress of the World Federation of the Deaf, which took place in September 1951. And whereas deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing individuals reside in Laramie, And whereas the community benefits from many contributions of deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing residents, and whereas the purpose of Deaf Awareness Week is to increase public awareness of the issues and the culture of people who are deaf. The event is an opportunity to promote equal access to information and services for deaf individuals and to educate the public about the misconceptions of being deaf, whereas the last week of the month of September has been designated as Deaf Awareness Week to celebrate and recognize deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing individuals and promote awareness in the community. Now, therefore, I, Paul Weaver, Mayor and President of the governing body of the City of Laramie, Wyoming, do here proclaim September 18th through the 24th, 2022 as Deaf Awareness Week in the City of Laramie, and encourage all citizens, businesses, public and private agencies, religious and educational institutions to join in observing the week in honor of persons who are deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing. I understand we also have some guests with us this evening, and I would now like to turn over the floor. I believe we have Ms. Cunningham, Allison Cunningham, with us. And Ms. Cunningham, if you'd like to share something with us now, you have the floor.
Yes, my name is Allison Cunningham, and I am a member of the Laramie, Albany County for Disabilities, Laramie Access for Disabilities. Hold on, interpreter clarification. I joined the Laramie Advisory Council on Disabilities last year in November. So it's been almost a year now. I want to focus here in Laramie regarding deafness. I want to improve the communication access, improve deaf awareness, because we are a small community, but we're also a strong collaborative community. And we don't want anyone left out. So it's important to support one another. We have, good neighbors. And maybe some of you know or are just unaware. Oh, I wanted to let you know that I am running for a council ward. So vote for me in November. I and another individual, we're both running. We're the top delegates for that area. So the reason why I'm running for the community is that I have a few amendments. Oh, sorry, I am backing up. My top amendment my top agenda is for the city council. Is to make the community accessible by all people.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the fairness in mentioning that. Of course, there are multiple people running for the seat, but we appreciate the information and we appreciate the efforts towards increasing awareness and understanding and possible suggestions for improving on those topics. And we're very pleased to have you speak to us with regard to this proclamation this evening. And we appreciate your time and your efforts and your volunteerism as a member of the Laramie Disabilities Commission. Thank you very, very much. Ms. Carter, if it's appropriate, the council would also like to thank you.
You're very welcome.
We're very, very pleased to have you with us. Thank you very much, everyone. That'll now take us to item number 7. Are there any council members that have any disclosures that they want to make the council aware of on any of the items coming before us on the consent or regular agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on.
Honorable Mayor.
Yes.
You skipped 6C, which was announcements.
Oh, thank you very much, Assistant City Manager Fieser. Announcements. Do we have any announcements?
Mayor, we do. I'll let the Assistant City Manager go first, and then I'll wrap it up with a couple items.
Thank you.
Thanks, City Manager. Nancy, did you get that email I sent you with the pictures? Can you share those for me real quick? Just wanted to make council aware that the past 2 Wednesday nights, we had volunteer groups come out to help us in a couple of areas. The first Wednesday, they went up to the rec center and removed trash and debris from around the rec center campus along with Boulder Avenue in the islands, and pulled weeds that night before school started and were a great help. And then last Wednesday, they came out to downtown and we went around and cut weeds out of the sidewalks and picked up trash and took care of stickers that were on the light poles and did some general cleanup down there that we simply just don't have the staff to do. You know, across the 2 weeks, the Laramie Institute of Religion Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints actually provided 120 plus hours of volunteer time. And to tell you the truth, I feel like it really showed in the downtown and really shows at the rec center campus, and we really appreciate their help. And I didn't want to go without giving them a public applause for what they did. I also want to use this self-servingly for anybody that's listening. If there are any volunteer groups that want to go out there, that I'm game to be using volunteers to do any cleanup work that we can do that we can't get to with staff, and happy to participate in making those events happen. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Flew? City Manager.
Mayor, thank you. On behalf of the City County Steering Committee for update of the Aquifer Protection Plan, I wanted to mention that tomorrow evening on Wednesday, September 7th, we will have the first of 3 meetings that will be public input events for folks to give input on the draft of the Aquifer Protection Plan updated document. Tomorrow's meeting starts at 6 p.m. It will last until 8. There is a Zoom option for folks who would like to attend in that way, and the meeting will also be held in person at the Municipal Operations Center public meeting room for folks who do not have connectivity. The public meeting room at Municipal Operations Center is the new building that the city has recently opened at 4373 North 3rd Street. So I wanted to remind the public about that event. The next 2 meetings will be September 13th and October. And then one other announcement, if I could, on behalf of myself and the city clerk and the youth council, city council liaisons, the city is currently accepting applications for Laramie Youth Council. So if you are 14 to 19 years of age and would be interested in serving on the city's youth council and working with city government on issues of interest to youth, those applications are available on the city's website. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager. Assistant City Manager Fieser, I apologize for skipping that item. That was inadvertent on my part. We've already discussed disclosures, so we'll move on now to item number 8. I'd like to turn it over to the Vice Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I move that the consent agenda be approved and that each specific action on the consent agenda be approved as indicated.
Second.
Second.
Motion and a second from Councilmember Somerville. City Clerk, can we have a roll call vote?
Humby, absent. Gabriel,
Yes.
Harrington,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Schmickel,
Yes.
Schuster,
Yes.
Somerville,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 8 yeses, 0 nos, and 1 absent, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk and Council. That motion is carried. The consent agenda has been approved. Now going to take us into item number 10, the regular agenda. First item on the regular agenda is item number 11. I'd like to call on Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to approve the contract amendment number 1 to the North Campus Water Main Project in the amount of $230,340, along with a contingency of $10,000 for a total amount not to exceed $240,340, and amend the fiscal year 2023 water fund budget by $59,000 and authorize the mayor, city clerk to sign.
Second.
Second.
So motion and a second, very close, I believe, Councilmember Schuster on that item. We've got Mr. Webb here. Mr. Webb, welcome back. Good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. So this project originally started as bringing water out to the MOC North Campus. The bulk of that project has wrapped up. We have water, which is always a good thing. Anyway, the next part of this is to bore underneath Highway 287 and get a stub out on the other side of the highway. That will provide water to some of our current users that are on the other side, and also for future development within the area. As you know, we have a future project that actually loops this water line all the way back to town that will assist in development all along the 287 corridor from here back to the city. And this is also kind of the first part of that. We've got to get across the road. Our contractor that did the project bringing the water out is lined up and ready to start this project this month as an amendment to the current contract. We as you can see from the financials on this, we have the majority of the money in contingency already. Is what we're asking for through this contract amendment is an additional $59,000 to get the project completed before it gets really cold and the ground gets really hard. So with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Appreciate it, Mr. Webb. Any questions? Any comments? It's good to hear about the expansion of that infrastructure out there for future development, Mr. Webb. I know that's something council's really interested in hearing about. It's good to see this long-running, long-planned, and frankly, long-executed plan coming to a close here. Why don't we see if we have public comment on this issue? And yeah, we'll recognize Ms. Cunningham. You have the floor. Wait, City Clerk.
Sorry, Mayor. I have to adjust it so our interpreter can see Ms. Cunningham.
Understood. Thank you very much. We are ready for Ms. Cunningham. Ms. Carter, I think. Okay. You have the floor.
I wanted to let you know about Deaf Awareness Week and Esther Hartsky. Every year, the National Deaf Awareness Week for the University of Wyoming. This is the first time in the Laramie community that we've collaborated with the University of Wyoming and for this Deaf Awareness Proclamation. And so I just wanted to let you know what we were going to do. I can't decide everything on my own, services for the deaf and access to the community. But for general access, I certainly want to work with the City Council as well as the University of Wyoming to provide social media and email information about events that may be occurring for fun. And it wouldn't be a long presentation, but certainly information on deaf culture, perhaps some movies, I'm talking about a movie that is titled Coda. There's deaf individuals in that movie that are signing. It's very interesting. So, and it's just, it involves interaction with deaf and hard of hearing individuals, or excuse me, hearing and deaf individuals. It's a fun way to learn about the deaf community.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We will now see if there's any other public comment. Seeing none, we'll close the public comment period. Council, it's back to you for comments or questions on the item before we go to a vote, if there are any. All right, City Clerk, if we could have a roll call vote on the approval of contract amendment number 1 to the North Campus Water Main Project.
Humby, absent. Gabriel,
Yes.
Harrington,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Schmeckel,
Yes.
Schuster,
Yes.
Somerville,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 8 yeses, 0 nos, and 1 absent, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk and Council. That motion carries. That takes us now to item number 12. I'd like to call on Council Member Schmeckel, I believe.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to award the bid for the ditch cleaning project to McDonald Farms Enterprises in the amount of $494,000, along with a contingency of $49,400 for a total amount not to exceed $543,400, and amend the budget as appropriate and authorize the mayor and city clerk to sign.
Second.
Motion and a second from Vice Mayor Pierce. Mr. Webb.
Honorable Mayor, City Council, the oxidation ditches out at the wastewater treatment plant, every 5 to 7 years, we clean those out. They get a lot of sludge buildup in the bottom, and the air diffusers in the bottom of those ditches need to be replaced. Without this project, the plant becomes very inefficient. I had a picture that I meant to include in your package, but I failed to do so. But if you go to Google Earth and look at the wastewater treatment plant and look at the ditches, they're actually cleaning them on the Google Earth picture from 2016. It's pretty neat. But anyway, the ditches out there, each ditch is about a little bit smaller than a football field. So it's a pretty big project, a pretty big undertaking. We do one at a time. Obviously, we can't shut them both down at one time or we're not treating. So we have 2 ditches mainly for that reason, so that we can work on one while the other one is in operation. We went out to bid on the project. We got 2 bidders. McDonald Farms came in substantially lower. We've worked with them in the past. They've done a good job for us. So after review of the bid documents, we're recommending McDonald Farms get awarded the contract.
Thank you very much, sir. Do we have any questions for Mr. Webb about the ditch cleaning project? We know that it's been done successfully before. Back in 2016, they took pictures of it. Why don't we see if there's public comment on the agenda item of the ditch cleaning project? Public comment on the ditch cleaning project item. Seeing none, we'll close the public comment period and move forward to the next item. Item number 13. And I'll call on Vice Mayor Pierce.
Mayor,
Oh, yes.
we still haven't done roll call on item 12.
Thank you. Why don't we have a vote on item number 12?
Cumby, absent. Gabriel,
Yes.
Harrington,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Schuster,
Yes.
Schmeckel,
Yes.
Somerville,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 8 yeses, 0 nos, and 1 absent, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk, and let me underline, thank you, and Council. Now let's move on to the next item. Item number 13, Vice Mayor Pierce, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I move that council approve resolution 2022-55 pursuant of Wyoming State Statute 15-9-106, finding that blight exists within Laramie and that rehabilitation, redevelopment, and conservation are necessary for public health, safety, morals, or welfare of our residents, and authorize the mayor and city clerk to sign.
Second.
Motion and a second from Councilmember Gabriel. Now to Assistant City Manager Fieser for background on the item.
Honorable Mayor, City Council. This is staff's attempt to meet the policy goals from Resolution 2022-15. Most notably is Milestone 5, which is the establishment of an urban rural authority, and consider all available tools for addressing blighted areas and renewing areas ready for development. If I could say one thing about what we're trying to do tonight is we are continuing to try to add to the tools that developers in the city can use to provide for development within the community. Currently, Wyoming State Statute 15-9-101 through 137 authorizes municipalities to create urban renewal authorities. What we're working on tonight is the initiative resolution that is under 15-9-106, which requires the governing body to establish that one or more slum or blighted areas exist within the community, and that is strictly what this resolution is doing. Through the work that we've done, if you note on the cover sheet under the background, we had provided you with the process to get to where we have a functioning urban renewal authority, and it's pretty well indicated that this is simply the first step where we declare again that there's slum or blight that is defined by 9 items out of 15-9-106 that I was hoping to provide real quickly for you. I've got to get to it again. The 9 items that construe blight within our community would be deteriorated or deteriorating structures, the predominance of defective or inadequate street layout, faulty lot layout in relation to size, accessibility, or usefulness, unsanitary or unsafe conditions, deterioration of the site or other improvements, diversity of ownership, tax, or other special assessments, delinquency exceeding the fair value of the land, defective or unusual conditions of title, the existence of conditions which endanger life or property by fire and other causes, and then there is other. We obviously didn't use other as any of our details as we moved through the process. However, this study did not identify any project plans or any specific areas. That will come later after we have an urban renewal authority established. With that being said, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
questions? Caesar. Councilmember Schuster.
The end statement on it is what really makes me curious. Public health, safety, and morals. And that word morals really just kind of shocks me in that is that when we were talking about delinquent taxes and stuff like that? Because that statement really confuses me on that. It just really confuses me to have that in there.
Honorable Mayor, through you to Councilor Schuster, just to note, those are the exact words taken out of Wyoming state statute and are not words that were created by the City of Laramie staff. So that is a representation of exactly what's out of state statute. I believe that morals could be defined however somebody wants to define them for their own purposes.
Other questions for Mr. Feaser? Councilmember O'Doherty.
I'd like to remove the comma and the word morals because I feel like our morals are intact with or without flight in Laramie. So I would like to make an amendment to remove the word morals and adjust the punctuation accordingly. Thank you.
Councilmember Gabriel.
Thanks, Mayor. I was just curious if we make amendments to this, Todd, do you know if it's going to affect the credibility of what council does?
I'm going to intervene here. I think we need to get a second on this.
Okay, sure.
But the chair is also going to ask the city attorney if he might provide the council with some advice with regard to alteration of statutory language being cited by the city in order to move forward with this process.
Well, Mayor, since this is absolutely the baseline first step in this process and does nothing substantive except let the city begin to go down this road of determining urban renewal districts and areas and specifics, I don't think that this is the time to alter language that just kicks the process off.
City Clerk.
Mayor, if we could still get a second to discuss the amendment.
It's the opinion of the chair that no second is forthcoming, and the amendment will not be moved. Other questions, comments, or discussion? I have a question for Mr. Feaser or anyone else that is prepared to answer this. Can we, as the council, perhaps ask you to share with us some examples of this policy in use in Wyoming and what that's done for a community that may have initiated this?
Honorable Mayor, I'll go first and then turn it over to City Manager Jordan for follow-up. The City of Cheyenne has instituted the hitching post plan, which has caused for the removal of what remained of the hitching posts after the fire and started redevelopment in a commercial fashion of that area. We haven't seen the outcomes of it. They're currently in the middle of the project, but it was a way to get development heading in an area that had been blighted, in an area that I was familiar with around the Ice and Event Center that we dealt with for many, many years. With that being said, I would pass it over to City Manager Jordan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. Mayor and Council, just doing some quick research on publicly available information from the City of Casper. Some of you may be familiar with what's become known as the Old Yellowstone District, which is adjacent to the core of Casper's downtown. The urban renewal tool was used by Casper to renovate that Old Yellowstone District. That is about 100 acres of what was developed land, but had really deteriorated. It was originally kind of a light industrial or industrial area. And if you are familiar at all with that community, as I am, because I grew up there, the improvements that they made in that commercial and business area are really notable. And the Yellowstone district is now where they have David Street Station and is really kind of the heart of their downtown in the way that our downtown has always been key to Laramie, although, as you know, Casper's downtown was never as strong. So there is a relevant example in Casper. I also haven't had enough time to dig into one other area, but I do believe that the renovation of the Amoco refinery there, which was turned into a golf course and a recreation area, I think they also may have used Urban Renewal Authority to renovate that old refinery, but I need to do a little more research on that.
Thank you, City Manager. Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. City Manager, can you give an example of the types of work that was done using the funds from the urban renewal on the Yellowstone Avenue district in Casper?
Through you, Mayor, Councilor Harrington, if I understand your question, you're asking what kind of work they did, like with respect to the existing structures and what was put in place to replace it or to improve it?
That's correct, yeah. I'm really, City Manager, I'm really looking to understand better how they utilize the funds to begin rehabbing, maybe not David Street Station specifically, because that's sort of like an exceptional project maybe, but how they use the funds to rehabilitate existing buildings.
From what I understand from reading through this, councilors, really where the city of Casper was most active was in rehabilitating infrastructure. So underground infrastructure, as well as like street, curb, gutter, and sidewalk. And then they worked with private partners to remove some of the buildings that were past their useful life, and in some cases to renovate and improve them. So for instance, there's an old fire station that had been, I think, a furniture store and was restored back to kind of its core nuts and bolts, so to speak, and some history preserved. And last I knew, I think there was a brewery that had ultimately purchased and moved into that for that sort of semi-industrial brewery feel. The other thing I'll mention is as I look at what they did, it looks like they also have used the URA to access a number of funding options, right? So they were able to access a brownfields grant to, first of all, study whether there was any contamination and do an environmental phase 1 and 2 there. And then they also have pulled in a bunch of funding for National Register buildings to assess the historic elements of the neighborhood, and then to improve infrastructure, like I said, through Community Development Block Grant. And there's a lot more to it, but just on quick review, that seems to be the main things that they looked at and the main funding sources they used.
Honorable Mayor, if I could provide some additional information to Councilor Harrington's question, I'd appreciate it.
Please.
So under state statute, the activities of urban renewal are limited to certain items. Acquisition of slum area or blighted area or a portion of that area, demolition and removal of buildings and improvements, installation, construction, and reconstruction of streets, utilities, parks, playgrounds, and other improvements necessary for carrying out the urban renewal objectives of this chapter, disposition of any property acquired at fair value, carrying out the plans of voluntary or compulsory repair and rehabilitation of buildings or other improvements in accordance with the plan, and then the acquisition of other real property in any urban renewal area if necessary to eliminate unhealthy conditions. So in my mind, those would be all types of projects that could have happened in the Yellowstone district down in that area.
Councilmember Schuster.
Thank you. That answered a lot of my questions because I heard the word of acquisition of property, and I don't know if that's what they did in Cheyenne because I don't know which project you're most familiar with, So the old hitching post, right, was the one it was?
Correct.
So they acquired that property, and I have no idea who even owned it now because that, excuse me, went through so many hands and a arson case and everything else that, so you acquire the property first from the owners, and then we're going to tear it down, and then, and Laramie did something just like this with the old Fox Theater downtown. We acquired the property, we tore down the building, then we dedicated the property back to the DDA, and then the DDA has built on it and everything like that, because we did not hold the funds against it for tearing it down. We dedicated it back to them. So I guess it'd be kind of something similar to what we did here.
Honorable Mayor, through you to Councilor Schuster, I believe you are correct in that statement that this would be something similar. And quite honestly, the way that I understand it is the DDA is another institute authorized by state statute under similar sections of code as the Urban Renewal Authority. The Urban Renewal Authority just allows you to stretch that authority out to the city limits. That might be a general overview of where it lands. I do believe that we cannot overlay the DDA with the URA though, so we may have to exclude the URA or the DDA from any project plans.
Any follow-up?
No.
Thank you. That was a very interesting group of questions, because I was going to ask how, if the city had had a URA in place during the many years that it was dealing with the Fox Theater / Empress lot challenges, how this might have opened up more tools for us. And I think I'm going to ask if the staff would entertain that question, and would share any thoughts with this, with how a URA might have assisted with our approach as the city regarding that, because my understanding is that taxpayer funds to the tune of in excess of $1 million were put forward to address that issue by the city prior to it being deeded back to the Downtown Development Authority. And I'm just curious if you might, Assistant City Manager or City Manager, touch on how a URA might have assisted with that approach and possibly been a tool that we could have used had we had one at that time.
Honorable Mayor, through you, Janine, or City Manager Jordan, I'll give it a stab and then you come in and follow up with where you believe it would land. Absolutely do believe that it could have functioned in that realm. Now, the Urban Renewal Authority has more powers than just tax increment financing, but in tax increment financing, we could have used future property tax that would have been collected from the advancement of development on that area and collection of property tax increases to offset the public amount invested at one point over a certain amount of time. So I think it could have eased the pressure on coming up with the amount of money up front to get the project going and help make the project go, although it would have been paid back over a decided upon amount of time, which everybody says the amount of time under state statute is not established. However, most people won't do an urban renewal agency or tax increment financing district beyond 20 years. So if you collect that property tax over 20 years, it would reduce that initial upfront impact of that $1 million public funds that could have come in. City Manager Jordan.
I think you did a great job, Todd. And yes, Mayor, I think we could have used this tool as well instead of the $1 million of taxpayer money. I think where we felt the return on investment would come back to the public, but was by eliminating a blight, but also a health condition perpetuated by the extensive infiltration of the pigeons and other vermin into that building downtown. So by eliminating that, there was a sense of urgency, I should say, to eliminate that. And then the return on investment coming by taking down the building, eliminating the hazard to the surrounding buildings because it was collapsing, and then being able to build it back into an amenity for the community using grant funds that brought a viable retail frontage to the downtown as well as additional housing. So a little different perspective on the payback than you would see through a URA. Intangible payback, I think, to the community, less so than actual dollars in the coffers.
Interesting perspective. I want to note two things about that before I call on Councilmember Gabriel. The first is that I recall during the approval of the project for the now thriving Big Hollow Food Co-op, 2 points of information that were shared with the council during that process, and I was on the council at the time that that project was initiated. One was that the cost barriers to the renovation of that lot to put in place the current business were such that without a public-private partnership, the financing for the business would have been very difficult to obtain or secure. In other words, without a partnership that accessed some state funds for the rehabilitation of that, it would have been unlikely that a private business or private business project would have been able to move forward with that, given the substantial costs involved for preparation of the lot, even in its dormant state. Prior to the demolition of the building, I recall concerns being shared by adjacent business owners with regard to the pestilence issue and the pigeon guano that the city manager mentioned. It's worth bearing in mind that before that was an empty lot, it was a dilapidated building immediately adjacent to other businesses that expressed concerns with regard to those topics. And it was very much a challenge to decide how to move forward with that in the city of Laramie to address those concerns and to generate, as we have, economic opportunities. So I appreciate that. Some observations that I wanted to share right on the tail of the historical information there. Councilmember Gabriel, I appreciate your waiting while I outlined those things because I think they were important to address. Go ahead, Councilmember Gabriel.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Mayor, for that little historical perspective, remembering all that stuff from the past. That was interesting. Todd, I was just kind of curious, for the public's sake, you know, we're talking tonight about this being the first step in the URA. Can you run down kind of the process in the next couple of steps and the time frame of where, if the city council finally approves something, on how that would actually come to fruition?
Honorable Mayor, through you to Councilor Gabriel, absolutely. From this step, it would be the establishment of the Urban Renewal Authority Ordinance, which will require three readings, and it will establish the framework for the operation of the URA, citing the powers that are available through Wyoming state statute. I would anticipate us starting that probably early October and moving through those three readings through the middle of November. And then beyond that would be the appointment of the 5 members of the URA, which is required through state statute, which may take some time to establish some membership and get them selected through the council process where they fill boards and commissions. After that, the first meeting of the URA, they will have an election of officers and adoption of bylaws, and we'll start the education of the board on the powers of the USA. And then we can start hoping to receive project plans as we move forward. The project plans under Wyoming state statute, let me get my statute back open. You know, the municipality may prepare an urban renewal plan or have one prepared, and any person or agency may also submit an urban renewal plan to a municipality for us to take forward through the Urban Renewal Authority, then to the Planning Commission, then back to council for approval of those plans. Establishment and education of the participants of the URA, I'm hoping to complete sometime in January, maybe early February, and then maybe we'll see our first project come in March or April at that point.
That was very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
City Manager?
Mayor and Council, if I could just tack on there, I'd like to point out that, the statute pertaining to this does provide for the rehabilitation to occur, let me think how I want to say this, in partnership with private enterprise. In fact, I think the statute even indicates a preference for municipalities where they're able to work with private enterprise to invigorate the area. And so I want to point that out and also point out that I think Todd and I are of a like mind that once created, that would be our preference as well and recommendation to you as professionals here at the city is that we work very closely with private enterprise. I think we're going to get a better product, and I think we're going to have more involvement of the community if we do in fact work with those private entities versus taking this really municipal activity.
Honorable Mayor, agree 100% with Janine's statements.
Thank you very much. Council members, I'm going to open this up for public comment, and then we'll go back to the council. But before I do that, I want to make sure that everyone's had a chance for a question or a comment at this time. It appears so. So we'll open it up for public comment. I'd like to recognize Brett Glass. Mr. Glass, you have the floor when you're ready.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and members of council. Can you hear me okay? Good. Okay. Well, I'm being asked questions as a candidate to possibly join you on City Council. I'm being asked a lot of questions about this urban renewal effort, and so I've begun to do research. And my first concern and question is about the provision of the state statute, which is required to be met before you can do this. You have to have a blighted area, which, and I'm quoting from the statute here, is a menace to the public health, safety, morals, or welfare in its present condition and use. Now, it's true that the Empress unquestionably was that, but Laramie doesn't seem to have any slums now. And I'm wondering what the city has in mind. Is it just looking for money for projects? Why is it doing this? And what horrible thing is it hoping to correct? Because I don't. People are asking me, what is this for? And I honestly don't know the answer to that. What areas people think are sufficiently blighted to be a menace? And they're also concerned about, and maybe the city manager's office, the city manager or assistant city manager could address this, about the provisions having to do with condemnation and eminent domain. Is the city planning to seize properties as part of this effort? Anyway, I'd like to find out where we can get more information about this and perhaps get some elucidation as to what the intent is.
Seeing no further public comments on this item, we'll close the public comment period and go back to the council. City manager and assistant city manager, I would like to voice the questions that I just heard to see if we might get some information with regard to those questions, which I think were fair, and perhaps address those. So whoever would like to go first, I'm all ears.
Honorable Mayor, again, if I can go first, I will try my hardest, and then Janine can follow up. But I know the 159106 was shared with City Council based on what we're doing tonight. Nowhere in that section of the resolution do I see where it reads that the property has to be a menace. I don't see that, and if somebody can direct me to where it says that in 159106, I would appreciate it, but it's certainly not in there. As far as eminent domain and condemnation, under some of the powers of the authority, is condemnation is not a power authorized to the Urban Renewal Authority. However, state statute and municipal code does allow eminent domain and condemnation just currently as we sit. That's not a new power that we have. However, the city has no intent of enacting eminent domain or condemnation on any of these projects or projects that may come our way. In our model, I believe the project plans are going to come in under full agreement between all the folks that are part of the property or part of the area that are becoming part of this to help make these projects more affordable, whether it's by improving stormwater or street capacity or doing anything that might be that barrier to development through tax increment financing. I was going to try to look up at where it said the powers. It takes me a second to get through all these pages of the Urban Renewal Code. But Janine, if you have anything to add, I can look that up.
Yeah, Todd, I just looked it up. So, Mayor, if you don't mind, I'll kind of jump in. In 15.9.103, there is a reference to, well, rather an extensive paragraph talking about what a blighted area means. It includes things such as deteriorated or deteriorating structures, predominance of defective or inadequate street layout, inadequate accessibility or usefulness, unsanitary or unsafe conditions, deterioration of the site or other improvements, and it goes on rather extensively. There's also an other section which is reference, council, in your packet materials in the blight study on page 5 at the very top, and it allows for other to include any combination of factors substantially impairing or arresting the sound growth of a municipality that retards the provision of housing accommodations or constitutes an economic or social liability and is a menace to the public health, safety, morals, or welfare in its present condition and use. And that's from 15.9.103 III.
Thank you, City Manager.
Council, I'll just close by stating the blight survey is contained in your packet materials if you had time to read through that, and has extensive pictures of conditions that pose all of that are examples of the issues that I just discussed in terms of dilapidated structures and unsafe conditions. And Mayor, if I could, I guess I would point out as well that one of the areas that we're actually trying to improve is in fact city-owned property. And this would just be a tool whereby we can address very, very aged structures at what we call our North 4th Street complex of buildings. And some of those structures really are in excess of 70 years old. So this would enable us to redevelop the city's property in a way that could be beneficial to the community.
Thank you, City Manager. And I recall that this discussion regarding the city-owned property that you just mentioned was, in fact, one of the key motivations behind the council's adoption or consideration of adoption of the URA. And that is, as we touched on earlier in the meeting with regard to the new Municipal Operations Center completion, something that's been under consideration for some time, both moving facilities out to the new center and determining a good pathway forward for the properties on 4th Street. And that was one of the reasons this has been adopted, I think, repeatedly as a policy goal by the City Council going back at least to 2016, or at least under consideration as a component of a policy goal. Something else I want to point out is when you look at the statutory language under 15.9.106, which is a little bit further down from what we were just looking at, 15.9.106 has a subsection that says, subsection 1, one or more slum or blighted areas exist in the municipality, and subsection 2, the rehabilitation, conservation, redevelopment, or a combination thereof of the area or areas is necessary in the interests of public health, safety, etc. It's a rather broad and encompassing set of potential motivations for using these tools. Back to staff, Mr. Fieser.
Honorable Mayor, if you look at 15.9.133, it states, let me go to the next one. If you look at C, which is at the very bottom, it specifically says that a municipality shall not delegate to an urban renewal agency or board or commission the power to acquire by condemnation real property within the boundaries of an urban renewal area. So the statute actually specifically precludes the urban renewal authority from having that power.
Thank you.
Mayor, if I could add one more thing.
Please.
Thank you. I didn't know if you knew my hand was up because I never put it down. Sorry. Thank you, though. I wanted to address maybe the question that you had posed with respect to creating a menace. You know, that's certainly something that the attorneys can, decide what that means. But I will tell you with respect to the North 4th Street city buildings, and that generally that section of town. We've known for a number of years that there is deficiency in the storm sewer infrastructure in that part of town. It just happens to be nearby to our own city facilities. But any business owner or any person who lives in the vicinity of North 4th Street from about Canby along 4th and 3rd up to Reynolds will tell you that there is a menace to at least their condition of their properties, where we've seen repeated instances of the storm drains being overwhelmed, most recently with this really very notable storm we had a few weeks back. There was standing water tall enough that when my police cruisers went down there to try to direct traffic in the street, there was sufficient water that we are having to replace a police cruiser. The engine was destroyed by being in 3 to 4 feet of water. So as the community's grown, those storm sewers are undersized. They need to be replaced, and this would be a tool for eliminating that property damage that can occur when those sewers are overwhelmed. At least in my mind, I consider that a menace, if you will, that we as public officials have a duty to correct for those property owners. And thankfully, nobody's physically hurt, but there's definitely a menace to property.
Thank you, City Manager. The statutory language does appear to be broad. I'd like to go back to public comment on the item because we had some questions posed that seemed appropriate to receive answers for, but we'll reopen public comment on the item and keep it open for one or more speakers. I'd like to recognize Tom Matamore and let Mr. Matamore into the meeting and to make comments. Mr. Matamore, you've got the floor.
Yes, I understand that this is strictly for the resolution, but one bone of contention is on the page 3 of the presentation for your resolution. You're showing pictures of property that's outside of the city, that's on the county, out in the old, specifically the old Texaco plant that's south of Spring Creek. As I recall, that section of road was abandoned by the city some years back and is not city property, and the actual Texaco plant was never city property or in the city. So that's one bone of contention. The other one is those North City yards. I've looked at this, and I think what this is all about is getting the TIF financing through. As far as the west, and that's fine, go for it. It's your property. It's got a zero tax base. If you can make something on it to rehabilitate it, fine. But this also goes into the west side. And the only way to fund streets on the west side and the infrastructure needed for those streets would be an assessment district, which the people on the west side have rejected on numerous occasions and have no desire to. If they would like to see streets, they just don't want to pay for it. So what funding procedure would you use to put in the streets on the west side? Also, there are some properties in your brochure that are simply just ugly, and we have plenty of means to deal with them through the zoning department and through planning department. And a lot of this, there are techniques and procedures set up that we can deal with these properties on an individual basis. So I'm trying to see, I dispute the need for the resolution in the first place unless you can show that there is no other alternative to develop the old city yards into a developable property. And as to proof of it, I give you the old Fox Theater. We didn't have a URA for the old Fox Theater, although it was available to us if we'd set one up. 15-9 101 through 137 has been around since 1984, as far as I can find, but we didn't use it for the Fox Theater. So there may be other ways to do this, and I'd like to see those explored before we stand up another bureaucracy. Thank you, Honorable Mayor, City Council, for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Metamore, and thank you for waiting for an opportunity to make your comments. I'd like to keep the public comment period open to ensure that everyone that wishes to has an opportunity to speak on the item. Council, does anyone object to a second speaking list on public comment? Recognize Mr. Glass and allow Mr. Glass to.
Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. I'm not going to take very long here. I have just emailed you the section of the statute which requires that the blighted area be declared a menace, just so there's no question about it. Like Mr. Metamore, I am not horribly opposed to the idea if this makes sense and if we can satisfy state statute. I'm just unclear exactly on what the intent is, and I'm hoping that more information will be forthcoming. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glass. As a city manager, earlier in the meeting, you outlined some examples of where the URA has been employed. And the question in my mind is when those were successfully employed, primarily with the Casper example coming to mind, with the cleanup efforts there, how the process worked for the determination of the areas to fit within the statutory guidelines. And that seems like it might be useful. Clearly that was to understand a little better when the city moves forward. Clearly those were decisions that the council had to make and took under consideration. I had been through that area of Casper over the years before that project began. And although I could see how it would be justified to try to create an opportunity to move forward there, I think, unfortunately, some of the language is a little bit subjective, but I think there are several layers of process that go into this before URA tools are employed. But I'd give you an opportunity to touch on that again. And I note that you still had your hand up from before, so if you'd like to weigh in on that or any other aspects of this that we're discussing, please do.
Thanks, Mayor. I didn't mean to have my hand up, and I put it down now. I will do better with that button. I'm not entirely sure I understand your question. I think you're asking what area are we prioritizing to?
No. Let me be more clear. Let me be more clear. What I'd like you to take a crack at is, given that we have an example of where these tools have been utilized in an area in a city in Wyoming, what the process for determining that they fit. And I see into this criteria may have looked like, and I see the assistant city manager may have some thoughts on that. So I'll call on the assistant city managers. Assistant city manager, have I helped with clarity for the question?
Honorable Mayor, through you, the way that I understand it is you're asking about the two communities that we know of. How did they get about and how did their pieces work? The one that I can speak to is Cheyenne's, because we're trying to follow their model pretty closely because it was the most recent one enacted as recent as 2021. We're working with the same consultant that the city of Cheyenne did work with in order to establish and conducting the same blight study under the same conditions that they used, and they haven't been challenged as to the authority or the legal process related to that, which gives us a feeling that what we're doing is correct as by that. As far as the city of Casper's, that old Yellowstone district plan, from what I looked at, was established clear back in 2002, and I don't have any knowledge of how they would have established that back at that time. But I can tell you that we are following as closely as we can the City of Cheyenne's process, although not at the light speed that they did, because they actually approved all their stuff in one fell swoop, which I opted not to do. I wanted to do the blight study and then get the Urban Renewal Authority in place and then establish the project areas, where they did the blight study and established the project areas in one fell swoop. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager, for deciphering my question, and I appreciate that. I'm not trying to be unclear. It's just kind of a complicated set of issues to think about. What I think I'm hearing is that there's a concern maybe about an arbitrary deployment of tools granted by the URA, and I think what we've seen in examples in other communities in the state where it's been used is there's been care taken to avoid that approach for reasons that are obvious. I think the respect for private property, and also making sure that the tools available are a good fit for the projects in question, not simply so that the city has an arbitrary set of tools that they can employ whenever they choose. And the projects are approached pretty carefully and are often long-standing areas where these kinds of questions arise. City Manager Jordan.
Thank you, Mayor. If I could talk a little bit about the tools that you mentioned, Mayor. We've talked about past projects such as the old Fox Theater in downtown Laramie that the city did demolish. And we've talked about the infrastructure investments that are being made in West Laramie. And what I would like to point out is part of the reason that we have not used URA in those projects is because we had significant one-time funding in, I would say, the early 2000s. So from about 2006 going forward, we had a lot of one-time funding coming through, largely from state revenue sharing. So in West Laramie, through 2017, we put $20 million into infrastructure out there. Since 2017, I'd say we've easily put in another $10 million. That one-time funding just isn't there. And so the URA will replace, what we had come to rely on for funding projects like this.
Thank you. Council, it's still open for you for your questions or comments. Council, I'll make a comment and then I'll turn it back over to you if you have any. I intend to support this, and my reasons for that are I think, pretty straightforward. I think there's a history of projects where this type of structure would have served Laramie well. I think it's unwise, as the city manager just illustrated for us, to count on the availability of one-time funding available for certain kinds of projects throughout the community. A third reason I have for supporting this is I at this point in time, am very much envisioning how it fits into the picture of city-owned properties that we'd like to have some tools to deal with. I think it's fair to say we've examined various things that we could use as approach to redevelopment. And we didn't simply land on the URA because it was the first to cross our paths. It's been under consideration along with other possibilities of how we might approach that for some time. And what I see the resolution doing is unlocking some possible tools. I also will note, and I'd ask council members to reflect on this as I'm reflecting on it. Over years of service on council, I've had many constituent and stakeholder groups in Laramie, regular everyday citizens asking me about certain sections of town and certain properties in town and about a long-term vision for those. I've had economic development people ask about those. We've had partners from big agencies like the University of Wyoming ask about possibilities and what can be explored with respect to certain areas in the community that might benefit from redevelopment. A lot of different groups. And I think that's worth keeping in mind. I also think it's worth keeping in mind that there are substantial controls for how these types of tools can be utilized. And there are layers of process that are put in place so that these decisions aren't made on a snap basis. And there's deliberate consideration for each and every time these types of tools are used. And for those reasons, I believe I can support this and will support it. Over to you, Council, for further questions or comments. Seeing none, City Clerk, can we have a roll call vote on the resolution?
Humby, absent. Gabriel.
Yes.
Harrington.
Yes.
O'Doherty.
Yes.
Schmeckel.
Yes.
Schuster.
Yes.
Somerville.
Yes.
Pierce.
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 8 yeses, 0 nos, and 1 absent, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk. That motion carries. Will take us into public comments on non-agenda items. Seeing none, we'll close the public comments and proceed to item number 15, discussion of future council work session topics and upcoming meetings, Council. Councilmember Schuster.
I'll start it. I think this topic that we're doing tonight, right now, is going to become, I don't know, halfway controversial. So I don't know if we want to set up a Tuesday work session night just to talk about this, but I see this one as possibly being controversial, maybe some amendments and things like that. So I just don't know if we want to get ahead of the ball game or if we just want to let it flow in. But as I know, after the first reading, we'll probably have a public comment night. I'm just wondering where as a council we would like to put this at.
Thank you, Councilmember Schuster. I would support that. I would support that. And I think it's reasonable. Councilmember O'Doherty.
Would this be a review of the session we already had on this or something different?
I can tell you why in my mind it might be something different. Councilmember Schuster, would you like to let me add my reasoning behind why I believe it?
Sure, go ahead, because I believe it's the ordinance that's going to come forward that's going to take the 3 readings is what I want to see us talk about, because it'll be slightly different, but it include a lot of this too, I feel.
Thank you. Yeah. City Manager, I draw your attention as we have this discussion about a potential work session topic about this, because based on what I've heard surrounding some of the concerns, I'm actually hopeful that those could be addressed in a council adopted process. I think I've heard a level of comfort with certain ways this tool might be utilized and some discomfort around some potential, although maybe not necessarily currently being planned uses of this that perhaps the community might be less comfortable with. And it seems to me that the city could, through the way we choose to decide to approach this, put some, for lack of a better term, guardrails around different types of uses for this within, that would certainly fit within the statute, but still meet our policy goals and our purposes as a council. And I just would like you to consider that. I don't expect you to comment on that necessarily right here off the bat, but that to me seems what would be some added value to a work session is, all right, we had a work session where we discussed what this does. We've adopted a resolution at this point to have those tools available, but I believe it's still open and available to the city to decide some specifics about how these tools may, or perhaps more importantly for some of the commenters we heard tonight, may not be used. And I think there might be some utility to that type of discussion. That's my feeling about it. Other discussion? Yes, Councilmember O'Doherty, and then I'll go to you, Vice Mayor. Sorry, I just have to go with whoever's hand pops up there. Go ahead, Councilmember O'Doherty.
Go to Councilor Pierce.
All right, Vice Mayor Pierce.
You know, Mayor, I appreciate your comments, and I feel as though once we have the ordinance or whatever transpires, there's no way to predict the future or the need 20 years from now. So if we create something that we hamstring our staff, ourselves, future councils, I don't think this is a good idea. So I think there has to be a level of trust, obviously, which I think is the biggest issue here. And I'm not necessarily supportive of putting parameters on our city as well as future councils, if I'm understanding what you're asking or what you're commenting on.
Vice Mayor, I think it's a fair point. I think whatever it is would have to be done carefully and with an eye towards the long term. I haven't had the opportunity to discuss it in a lot of detail, which I think is perhaps why the proposed work session has been put on the table here. But your points are well taken, certainly. Councilmember O'Doherty?
I don't have anything to add except that maybe we would review the work session that we already had on this topic. And also I would like public to know that I know of no one on this council that wants to start condemning properties and building casinos, as has been done in the more capitalist approach of this. So I just think that should be known, that we're not, we don't have an appetite for condemning places unless they were like a real public hazard, like with the pigeons. And I don't know that you used condemnation there either. You worked with people, and that's what we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember O'Doherty. And if council, if you'll allow it, I said this before, but I honestly don't feel like it can be said enough at this juncture with the council's responsibilities in the years to come. I wouldn't vote for anything that I thought was going to decrease the availability of our housing stock through an effort to redevelop or utilize TIF funding or a URA. I haven't heard that touched on much tonight, but I have heard it touched on in previous comments. I don't think that's a way that we'd want to utilize this tool in a way that would restrict availability of housing or rapidly increase property taxes and house, which are, as you all know, directly tied to house valuation. I don't think that's a move that we'd want to make right now. I think what we're looking to do is increase inventory. I'm not sure how direct of a line we can draw between what we've talked about tonight and the housing issues that we've talked about before. But if I were to see a connection between a negative impact on housing costs and a URA action, I would be unlikely as a member of the council to support it. And I think there's some value in mentioning that in this discussion. Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question, I guess, maybe would be, as we try to drill down on what this work session would be about, I would be particularly interested in knowing, to your previous point, how, sort of what our strategies are for, specific strategies are for preventing that sort of gentrification or maybe pigeonholing our projects. I think that would be something I would be curious to learn a little more about. So that, I think, is something that in my mind could come up at first reading, but if a work session feels more appropriate to the council, that's fine with me.
Thank you, Councilmember Harrington. City Manager, I'm going to go to you, but I think we're kind of getting a couple of different points here. We have curiosity, concern, and more questions. So to me, that does seem to support maybe a review work session that's perhaps a little more specific based around some of the concerns that we're now wrestling with, but also some concerns about preemptively limiting the policy in a way that would inhibit tools for councils in the years to come, which I think is always wise. So I think there's a couple of different things we're hearing here, and I think I needed to say that out loud for myself to sort of organize it. But I'll go to you now.
Mayor, thanks. I think you addressed my question. I was just going to clarify with council if we thought that you would like to have another work session, or if you'd like us to address these questions in the presentation and the materials that will come forward with first reading, and of course then all subsequent readings for all of the three. Sounds like you do want to have a separate work session before first reading comes forward. Is that correct? Am I kind of reading you all right?
It's a great question, City Manager, and my level of confidence about whether or not it can be included in the ordinance items versus we need a separate work session isn't clear. Why, can I have a straw poll, non-binding straw poll for folks that think it deserves an additional work session? Because I'm not confident. Versus who thinks it can be addressed with future actions. Sounds to me like it can probably be addressed with future actions, and readings can be extended if we get into areas of difficulty. And that's what I seem to be seeing some agreement with, but I'm going to check with Councilmember Schuster to see what his feelings are as he kicked off this discussion.
I could go with it either way. I just thought maybe the way some of the public felt about it, then maybe we would like to see something more, but I can live with this either way. They said it was coming in October. That's not that far away.
Provided that the questions are answered, I think I agree.
So, Mayor, we will, and for council, if you guys want to review those materials from the last two work sessions, I think Todd and I have heard what you've had to say, and we will try to improve those to address the concerns and the lack of clarity the public have on certain issues. And then if you review those materials and there's an area you'd like us to deep dive and focus more on, maybe just drop me a note or drop Todd a note. I think what I am hearing is it would be really useful for us probably to focus on the plan that would come forward and involve the public, and how the URA agency would develop that redevelopment or reinvigoration plan for specific areas.
City Manager, let's try that approach. And as we work through it, if we have to modify how we're going to answer questions, then we'll do that. But for now, that sounds like a plan. And I think I see the City Council largely in agreement with that. We'll see if we can address the questions that have been posed to us as we work forward, and we'll make whatever changes that are needed to provide adequate time for clarity and information as we go forward. Other discussions about upcoming meetings. Councilmember Schuster, back to you.
I'm sorry it's back to me, but I just want to, because I know all of us councilors want to welcome Interim Police Chief Robert Terry, and welcome him to a bunch of meetings that who knows if he wants to be here or not. But welcome to the new Assistant Police Chief Terry.
Thank you, Councilmember Schuster. Yeah, Chief Terry, thanks for being here. And we wish you luck as you go into your role I believe you've had it for a few days since last week with the departure of former Chief Dale Stalder. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. I look forward to the opportunity, even if it's just a temporary basis. But hopefully I do well in the chief selection panel, and I'll see you on a more permanent basis.
Thank you, Assistant Chief Terry. All right, Chief Terry, let me correct myself. All right, council members, back to you. Very good. Councilmember Schuster, I'd like to recognize you for item number 16.
Thank you. I move we adjourn for the evening.
There's a motion. There's a second from Vice Mayor Pierce. All those in favor indicate by raising your hand or saying aye.
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 Are there any that are opposed? Same sign. Thank you and good evening. Have a good one.